what are the two greatest franchises in the history of horror games? Right, it's Resident Evil and Silent Hill. You might not like those franchises personally. You might prefer horror franchises like Dead Space, or Amnesia, or Fatal Frame, and that's absolutely fine. But make no mistake, the impact these franchises had on global pop culture and game development is nothing compared to Resident Evil and Silent Hill. This is because both of them seized upon archetypal gameplay formulas, aesthetics, and themes when horror games were still in their relative infancy. And they did so well with those archetypes that virtually every horror game that has followed after is still measured up against their standard. This measuring has its benefits, particularly for modern game developers. A developer for a new horror game would be wise to recognize the archetypal material in those franchises and incorporate it into their own project. Of course, the aim is to not outright plagiarize what came before, but change it just enough so that it feels original. And if you want to pay tribute, it's best to maintain some subtlety so it doesn't become distracting. Unless it's an Easter egg, of course. It is due to this desire to avoid accusations of plagiarism, or lesser offenses of a similar nature, that the artist almost never thinks something equally creative can be found in the inverse. It almost never occurs to the artist that something could be wholly original, while also paying palpable tribute to what came before. And of course not, because not only would you risk accusations of plagiarism, it just sounds paradoxical. It would take the keenest discerning artist to make, for example, a horror game that blatantly references something like Resident Evil and Silent Hill, while also being original. Enter Signalis. This game is what happens when you take the survival horror gameplay of PS1-era Resident Evil and combine it with the storytelling and imagery from old-school Silent Hill. Now, when I say that to people who have never heard of Signalis, they think I'm invoking these games purely to be descriptive, but those who have played it know that I'm being very literal. Signalis is so much a combination of these two games that, in a couple of respects, it shamelessly rips off some of their concepts, right down to the name. Minor incoming spoiler for those who have never played Signalis. Skip to the timecode you see on screen now if you don't want to hear it. An example of a ripped-off concept is that there is literally an area in both Silent Hill 1 and Signalis called Nowhere that is filled with chain-link floors, blood on the walls, and inconsistent spatial orientation. Yet I hesitate to say the term rip-off because it's almost always used to denigrate. In Signalis' case, I weirdly say it with the utmost respect. This is because the developers injected so many original ideas and concepts into that alchemical mixture of Silent Hill and Resident Evil. Ideas that are of such quality that it makes the ripped-off elements not only non-distracting, they in fact add to the overall experience. The result is, to use a phrase my audience might be fond of, a perfect union of opposites. A blatant tribute, while also being its own thing. And both build on each other's strengths. Though the game has many other strengths, this strength alone makes Signalis an unprecedented creative achievement, one that every survival horror fan should play. It's so good that I will go so far as to say that it's the best Silent Hill game, quote-unquote, to come out since Silent Hill 3. And yes, I am taking The Evil Within into consideration when I say that. Another brilliant game. Now for the remainder of this video, I want to focus on where I believe Signalis makes the best union of opposite elements, its story. Before I do that though, I wish to address those who might be learning about Signalis for the first time from watching this video, and might be worried about spoilers. For the next few minutes, I will be providing a spoiler-free synopsis and analysis of the game's story. And then there will come a point where I provide a spoiler-filled explanation of some of Signalis' more obscure story threads. Don't fret though, I will provide ample warning before that happens. Finally, as I said before, there are a lot of references to Silent Hill in this game. I will try to include all of them, but for the sake of time and consistency, I won't address all of them verbally. Every time there is a Silent Hill reference, I will play this sound, and include explanation text on screen. Should make things smoother. Now, without further ado, let's dive into the story of Signalis. The game begins with the following text. Well, that was quick. We then see a quick cut to the game's main character, Elster, who is waking up from a prolonged sleep. She finds herself on a space vessel which crashed on an unknown planet. It is initially unknown to the player who she is or why she was aboard this doomed vessel. All we can surmise from documents and the game's opening cutscenes is that she is searching for somebody. Wait, is that a Nier reference? Based? Elster exits the ship to find a series of rectangular monoliths surrounding an arch. After crossing through the arch, she finds a hole in the earth, with a series of steps leading underground. After reaching the bottom, she finds a hole in the wall and begins to crawl through it. On the other side, she finds a room with a radio and the book The King in Yellow, by Robert W. Chambers. When Elster picks the book up, the radio turns on and starts reading out a series of random numbers. The following text then flashes on screen. Great holes secretly are digged where Earth's pores ought to suffice, and things have learned to walk that ought to crawl. This is a quote from H.P. Lovecraft's The Festival, a writer whose works just so happen to include references to places and things from the aforementioned King in Yellow. The cutscene then ends with the text, "Remember our promise," with shots of an anonymous white-haired woman, presumably the person that Elster is searching for. The gameplay then starts up again with Elster looking in a mirror inside a dilapidated bathroom. It is unclear whether or not the facility we are in is the same underground area we were in previously, or if this is a flashback or a flash forward. All we know for certain is that the facility has been overrun by twisted humanoid monsters, and they stand in the way of us finding out what the heck is going on. From this point on, you need to pay very close attention to every cutscene, every character you meet, and every document you come across in order to begin to understand everything. But even those who pay the utmost attention will only get half the story the first time they play through. Like Silent Hill, certain mysteries do get suitable answers the first time around. But then there are other mysteries that you have to figure out yourself by meditating on the lore for an extended period. For example, why is the world as decrepit and seemingly supernatural as it is? Why can't I get a hold of something from what looks like a dream and bring it with me to real life? Or what seems like real life? What role does the Lovecraft mythos have in regards to Signalis? Or are books like The Festival and The King in Yellow just red herrings? It's supposed to be disorienting. It's all part of the horror. Eventually, though, after you play through the game 2 or 3 times, a clear picture of what's going on will form in your mind. It's an anamnesis akin to the one that James Sunderland goes through in Silent Hill 2, when he remembers what happens to his wife. When everything inevitably falls into place, you experience a series of aha moments. And while these moments do make you feel smart and accomplished, they also bring feelings of deep disturbance and sadness. See, one thing that is unique about Signalis compared to most of the Resident Evil and Silent Hill games is its invoking of deep philosophical questions, rooted in classic sci-fi. Those questions, though, only reveal themselves after you uncover the surface level mystery. And then almost immediately after you solve the mystery, the sadness consumes you, like when you open a mimic chest in Dark Souls. In that spirit, I will now attempt to reveal what exactly was going on throughout Signalis' purposefully disjointed narrative, and analyze the existential questions it invokes. To those who are worried about spoilers, now is the time for you to click away and go play the game for yourself. Just make sure to favorite this video so you can come back and hear the explanation and analysis when you're done. So, one of the answers we get closer to the end of the game is the identity of the person Elster is searching for, a woman named Ariane Young. We also get hints at why she was on the ship at the beginning, why she left the ship, and why she was so important to Elster. Unfortunately, the delivery of this information through documents and in-game events is purposefully scattered, which makes putting together a chronological timeline of events very difficult the first time around. Hopefully, the timeline I put together should satiate those who had trouble understanding. Ariane Young grew up in an extraterrestrial colony called Rotfront, a colony whose political structure was directly opposed to the totalitarian and semi-religious empire of Yusan. Ariane and her mother, Iris, spent most of their lives on Rotfront in service of the Rotfront revolutionaries and their allies. Iris's contribution to the war effort was to work at a radio station for the rebels. Unfortunately for Ariane, this isolation influenced her greatly, birthing a very introverted, nonconformist personality. There was a point in Ariane's life where she was able to leave the radio outpost and go to school, but due to her personality and interests, she was frequently bullied by her schoolmates. Thankfully, there were two young girls, Erica and Isolde, who befriended her and appreciated her quirks, so much so that they introduced her to literature that was forbidden in the revolutionary bloc, specifically cosmic horror fiction like The King in Yellow and The Festival, as well as books on the occult. Like with every person living in the revolutionary colonies, there would inevitably come a time where they had to complete compulsory military service. Erica and Isolde signed up for this, and, unfortunately, died very soon after. The evidence for this is the black ribbons on both of their military portraits, and the fact that a tarot card for death is picked up at this location. This tore apart at Ariane's soul. The two people who made her feel normal were gone, and soon she might die as well when she becomes drafted in the army. Or if she refuses the draft, she would be sentenced to back-breaking labor in a mine. But there was a third option, which might have sounded the worst to other people, but not to her. That was the Penrose program. The military wished to send volunteers on space shuttles out into space in search of habitable planets. Of course, there was the likely possibility that Ariane would die in space, but at this point, she didn't care. Thankfully, she wouldn't be completely alone. She was assigned what was known as a replica unit. Replicas are biomechanical copies of other humans, people who are designated gestalts. The replica Ariane was assigned was none other than Elster. It is heavily implied that the gestalt for Elster was a relative of Isolde and Erica, Lilith. This would explain why, when Ariane was on board the Penrose vessel, she developed a relationship with Elster, because she reminded Ariane so much of Erica, the twin that she was closest to. Unfortunately, the vessel never finds habitable planets, leaving Ariane and Elster to slowly wither away on board. When this starts to happen, Ariane begins to display symptoms of what is known in the Signalis universe as bioresonance. Bioresonance is very similar to the powers that the character of Alessa Gillespie has in Silent Hill. The anguish that Ariane and Alessa feel unlocks their psychic abilities, which allows them to distort reality not only for themselves, but for others. This is why, for example, the protagonist in Silent Hill 1, Harry Mason, is able to see monsters that come from the mind of Alessa. Her thoughts are affecting Harry's thoughts and his perception of reality. It's also why, I think, that some of the carpet in the game is taken directly from the movie The Shining, a movie that influenced the creation of the Silent Hill games. In that movie, the psychic energy of the Overlook Hotel influences the perception of the Torrance family. Eventually, Ariane's thoughts and perceptions penetrate Elster's mind. This is why, I believe, we come across The King in Yellow and the quote from The Festival. It's not necessarily because there's anything Lovecraftian that's really going on. It's because Ariane liked those books, plain and simple. It's also why so many of the puzzles in the game are callbacks to Ariane's interests. There's a tarot card puzzle, whose analog is in Silent Hill 3. An alchemy-based puzzle, whose analog is the entirety of Silent Hill 1. Because that entire game is based around alchemical concepts. There's a ring puzzle, which is based off of the ring puzzle from Silent Hill 2. and one of those rings looks like an Ouroboros, a puzzle item you obtain in Silent Hill 1. Unfortunately, these crossovers in memories make it difficult to determine whose reality is whose and to what degree what we are experiencing is real at all. Did the Penrose vessel crash? To what degree are the other characters real? It is up to Elster, and by extension the player, to interpret what we see in the same way we interpret a dream. Not to take it literally, but symbolically. To find out what the underlying meaning is. The way I see it, the ultimate truth is that Ariane was dying, and what Elster is experiencing are a combination of Ariane's dying memories, projected through bioresonance. This is what I was referring to before, about how unlocking the mystery will lead to feelings of disturbance and sadness. Ariane and Elster's ultimate end is not only bleak, it's a bleakness that stays with you on account of the existential questions it invokes. Though bioresonance primarily affects Elster, we see its effects on other characters we see in the game, real or not. How it not only affects their perception of reality, but their sense of self. When other people's thoughts and memories cross over with one's own, one cannot determine where one's true self ends and the other person's self begins. It's very reminiscent of Ghost in the Shell, an anime whose influence on Signalis is clearly seen closer to the end of the game. In that anime, memories can be implanted into people's brains, giving them a different personality. When a person realizes their sense of self is not their own, it provokes an existential breakdown. It fosters an unimaginably deep pain that human language can't describe. Though the crossing of minds is something that Silent Hill did a lot, the philosophical implications of that are something that was never really explored. Thankfully, the creators of Signalis saw the creative opportunity here and exploited it to the most horrifying degree. They took the archetypes that Silent Hill birthed and evolved them, making something intensely familiar but novel at the same time. There are a couple of other things that I didn't address for the sake of time and clarity, specifically regarding the characters of Alina and Falke. If you want to see how they factor into my interpretation of Signalis' story, please look for the explanation in the description box below. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, make sure to give it a like. I mean, come on, I'm making this video while I have COVID. At least give me some props for that. Make sure to subscribe for more in-depth analysis of games, movies, and other forms of thought-provoking media. Finally, if you like the work I do here and want to help ensure its continuation, please consider supporting me on Patreon or joining my YouTube members section. I will leave a link to both in the description box. Until next time, remember to stay safe and stay yellow.